In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed west and discovered a continent that Europe didn't know existed. That is the story every schoolchild learns. Here is the story they don't. 500 years before Columbus left Spain, a Norse sailor blown off course in a storm looked up and saw the coastline of North America. He turned around and went home. And the man who actually landed there, who built houses, traded with the locals, and established the first European settlement on American soil, did it without a compass, without a map, and without anyone in Europe ever finding out for 500 years. Columbus didn't discover America, he just had better publicity. The Vikings were not the horned helmet-wearing savages that medieval monks, their primary victims and, crucially, their primary chroniclers, painted them as. They were farmers, traders, craftsmen, and explorers operating in a world where the sea was not a barrier, but a highway. Scandinavian geography made them what they were. A landscape of narrow fjords, thin agricultural soil, and long coastlines that pushed people outward onto the water simply to survive. They built the finest ships of the medieval world, sleek, shallow-drafted longships that could cross open ocean and navigate rivers alike, flexible enough to absorb the stress of Atlantic swells without breaking apart, light enough to be carried overland between waterways. Their expansion began in the late 8th century and moved in every direction simultaneously. Viking raiders struck the monasteries of Britain and Ireland. Viking traders pushed deep into Russia along river routes, establishing the trading cities that would become the foundation of the Russian state, the word Russia itself possibly deriving from the Norse Rus, the name Slavic peoples gave to the Swedish traders who dominated those river routes. Viking merchants reached Constantinople and Baghdad, trading furs and amber for silver and silk. They were simultaneously the most feared and the most commercially sophisticated people in early medieval Europe. And while one group was raiding the English coast, another was sailing steadily west into waters no European had previously navigated. Iceland was settled by Norse colonists beginning around 874 AD. A volcanic, geologically violent island in the North Atlantic that had been visited briefly by Irish monks but never permanently inhabited. Within decades, it supported a functioning society of farmers, chieftains, and the world's oldest continuously operating parliament, the Althing, established in 930 AD. From Iceland, the horizon kept pulling westward. Around 985 AD, a Norse sailor named Bjarni Herjolfsson was sailing from Iceland to Greenland when storms blew him off course. He sighted an unknown coastline, wooded, flat, and clearly not Greenland, turned around without landing, and returned to report what he had seen. He was reportedly mocked for his lack of curiosity. He had glimpsed North America and sailed away. The man who actually landed was Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, the magnificently named Norse chieftain who had been exiled from Iceland for manslaughter and responded by sailing west to discover and colonize Greenland. Leif bought Bjarni's ship, recruited a crew of 35 men, and sailed southwest following Bjarni's reported route in reverse. Around 1000 AD, he landed on the northeastern coast of North America, a place he called Vinland, likely for the wild grapes or berries his crew found growing there. He built shelters, wintered there, and returned to Greenland with timber, a resource Greenland entirely lacked, and a report of a rich, inhabitable land to the west. What followed were several further expeditions, including one led by a woman, Gudrid Torbjarnadottir, whose remarkable life story included traveling from Iceland to Greenland to Vinland and eventually to Rome on pilgrimage, making her one of the most widely traveled people of the early medieval period. Norse settlers attempted a more permanent colony at a place they called Stromfjord. They encountered the indigenous peoples they called Skrælings, almost certainly ancestors of the Beothuk or the Dorset culture, and relations deteriorated from cautious trading into violent conflict. Outnumbered, too far from any Norse support, and unable to maintain a defensible position, the settlers abandoned Vinland after a few years. The colony was over before Europe knew it had begun. For nearly 1,000 years, the Norse discovery of America lived only in the Icelandic sagas, oral histories written down in the 13th century, treated by most historians as mythology rather than record. Then, in 1960, Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad and his archaeologist wife Anne Steen Ingstad followed the saga's geographical descriptions to the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada, and found it. Meadows, a Norse settlement preserved beneath the Canadian soil, carbon dated definitively to around 1000 AD. 8 buildings, iron boat rivets, a spindle whorl indicating women had lived there. The sagas had been telling the truth all along. The Vikings reached America 5 centuries before Columbus, without GPS, without magnetic compasses, navigating by sun position, star patterns, wave behavior, bird species, and ocean color changes that their accumulated maritime culture had turned into a sophisticated navigational system. They got there, they landed, they built, they left, and the world didn't change. Because discovery without consequence is not history, it is simply an event. Columbus's arrival in 1492 triggered 500 years of colonization, exchange, and catastrophic transformation because the Europe of 1492 had the ships, the guns, the diseases, and the imperial appetite to follow up on what he found. The Vikings found America first. What they lacked was not courage or skill or curiosity. What they lacked was everything that came after. The longship turns back into the gray Atlantic. The coastline fades. The continent waits 500 more years for the arrival that will change it forever. If this reshaped how you think about discovery, subscribe, because every week we find the histories that the famous version of events quietly erased.